Let's compare the 3 ranged physical DPS of Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. If you already know you want to main a ranged job, then this might help you choose, or alternatively, maybe teach you what you don't want. Or maybe you just want to hear about the pros and cons of each of these jobs combined with a bit of comedy, in which case you have also come to the right place. Please take note that this video of course includes my opinion at times, especially in some of the ratings shown for each job, so if you feel that I missed something or that you disagree, I would love to hear about it, or about your favorite ranged job in the comments. Now then, let's start with the Bard, combining music and archery in a surprisingly common fantasy trope that also leads to a lot of absurd harp bows that seem impossible to fire in the first place, which are not even used as an instrument at any point anyway. The general idea of the Bard rotation has changed, mostly in the way things are handled, but not much in what needs to be done since Shadowbringers, and revolves around circling through 3 different songs that sort of interact with the rest of the rotation as you go. Due to each song having a cooldown of 2 minutes, but a duration of 45 seconds, this enables the Bard to have a bit of agency in which song you wish to spend the most time in. On top of this, due to the sheer amount of cooldowns that aligns with the 2-minute burst for a Bard, a huge part of the job is about lining up all these things together for raid cooldowns, which can make the job feel extremely hectic, as several of these cooldowns will come up multiple times throughout this 2-minute time frame, and forgetting to press 1 on time can hurt damage output immediately. With all that in mind, this means that the basics of the Bard rotation is keeping up 2 damage over time effects, or dots, keeping track of Heartbreak shot charges, alongside using Imperial Arrow on cooldown, using Sidewinder every minute, and making use of your Hawk's Eye procs. On top of this, each song, as mentioned, has its own mechanic, with Mage's Ballad being a window where Heartbreak shots should instead be bursted out as fast as possible instead of even being considered used smartly. Army's Paean makes your GZD run much faster, which can make your cooldowns align weirdly compared to what they did before, and Wanderer's Minuet enables the use of Pitch Perfect, requiring coordinating the use of this specific ability whenever you hit 3 stacks, or sometimes 2, if Imperial Arrow is coming up too close. Better to have 2 2-stack Pitch Perfects than only 1 3-stack. In addition to all of that, Apex Arrow and Blast Arrow, depending on your soul voice gauge, which depends on the random chance of repertoire procs from the songs, as well as Imperial Arrow to accumulate, means that this big burst 1-2 punch comes up somewhat randomly, and it isn't out of the question that you can be exceptionally unlucky sometimes too, and it just really gets weird with the placement in your rotation. On average, a Bard would generate between 160 and 200 soul voice in a 2-minute window, so it should be fine. However, with that said, the general game plan of a Bard is to use all of the big cooldowns in the opener, and using pretty much everything as they come up. Around 1 minute into a fight, Apex Arrow and Blast Arrow is used, and then Wanderer's Minuet heralds the next burst, late weaved in, and then simply go into the burst in somewhat similar order to the opener, with the exception that now Apex Arrow and Blast Arrow are here too. Speaking of using everything, this includes Battle Boys, Radiant Finale, Raging Strikes, 2 or 3 Heartbreak shots, Sidewinder, Barrage, 2 Imperial Arrows, and as many Pitch Perfects as makes sense, and that's just the OGCDs. For GCDs, we have Apex Arrow, Blast Arrow, Barrage Refulgent Arrow, Radiant Anchor, Resonant Arrow, and Iron Jaw's Refresh your dots, or of course the application of said dots in the opener or reopener, and then as many Refulgent Arrows, or burst shots, as you can manage. For area of effect, the Bard forgoes the dots and just replaces their general attack strategy with their AoE alternatives, meaning Ladon's Bite, Shadow Bite, and Rain of Death. And since Pitch Perfect has an AoE component now, Wanderer's Minuet both represents the strongest single target and AoE song, as Mage's Ballad only gives half a Heartbreak shot or half a Rain of Death, which is notably less than whole Pitch Perfects, even if it's a single stack of Pitch Perfect. I should perhaps also mention, before all the sprouts run away screaming, that most of all this confusion and complexity of the Bard is added gradually as you level up, so you may well grow into this challenge as you do. In terms of defensive options, Bard uniquely has access to Nature's Min, which increases healing received by your entire raid, which can be immensely helpful to assist your healers, whether it is for staying alive during an intense extended mechanic, or to recover after one big hit. Bard also has access to Warden's Paean, the only ability-based debuff removal in the game, not to mention the only debuff removable available to non-healers. Warden's Paean is also the only way to remove a debuff preemptively, which can sometimes give Bard an edge in unusual situations where crowd control can be removed, or to remove something while healers are simply too busy to do that. Remember, the blue line over a debuff indicates it can be removed. All 3 ranged physical jobs also provide a raid defensive cooldown in Troubadour, Tactician and Shield Zamba, but these are role actions in all but name. The sheer power of this defensive cooldown can often make these roles feel invaluable in your average raid team. Aside from this, ranged physicals also offer Head Graze and Peloton, which serve as an interrupt, and an out-of-combat speed boost, which both are incredibly handy in dungeon content and sometimes unusual content like deep dungeons. Overall, Bard often provides the greatest raid damage boost in the game, with their constant buffs from their 3 songs, combined with having 2 raid buffs to combine on top. This can often lead to the actual damage of the Bard itself to look a bit underwhelming, but don't let that fool you. However, this simple fact can make Bard seem a bit on the weaker side in content with less than 8 players due to balancing. This quirk also makes Bard a bit weaker compared to the other ranged jobs in smaller groups or for soloing content like deep dungeons, despite also offering its more unusual tools like Head Graze and Peloton. But that does not change the fact that Warden's Paean also gives the job a clear advantage over the other 2. In terms of defense, Bard having 2 different flavored raid cooldowns in Troubadour and Nature's Min allows it to adjust a bit more to the situation. And if all of this sounds a bit overwhelming, remember that you simply need to unlock the job at level 30 to be allowed to access the performance menu, allowing you to play music wherever you like. I wonder how big a percentage of players just have the job at level 30 just for that, and I wonder how many of those are mains. Next up, Machinist, combining the fantasy of a gunner and, apparently, a chess enthusiast that also happens to be a bit of a gadgeteer. This leads to most of the Machinist's attacks involving pulling out random tools and gadgets from seemingly out of nowhere in particular, although a handful of them just use the same big multi-tool weapon. The Machinist also can summon a mechanical companion, which ultimately is more like a glorified dot than a real entity. It is a pet though. The Machinist rotation revolves around making sure the tools, drill, air anchor and chainsaw, and excavator go out on time, and pretty much everything else takes a backseat to this, and the rotation is thus built around this fact. The checks can be stockpiled for a burst, but given that the burst every 2 minutes often involves hypercharge multiple times, which generates a few of these, this can often be overwhelming, or for some players completely irrelevant. Imagine having a good enough connection to weave all of that, am I right? Reassemble also simply offers the opportunity to boost one of your tools per minute, which happens to almost always be Chainsaw, simply due to conveniently aligning. This leaves Barrel Stabilizer and Full Metal Field, Wildfire, Automaton Queen, and incidental hypercharge windows to fill in the rest alongside a simple 1-2-3 combo as a filler. As a result, the difference between the optimal Machinist rotation and just winging it can be incredibly massive. This is heavily caused by the fact that Machinist itself does not have any damage boosting cooldowns or rate buffs whatsoever, meaning that in a more casual setting, using your big damage buttons exactly at a specific point makes very little difference if there are no rate buffs to benefit from them, allowing the Machinist much more freedom to simply wing it, compared to a Bard, without their damage output being hurt too much from it. On the other hand, a Machinist optimizing 4 rate buffs may have one of the strictest rotations in the game, and a single mistake on the way can ruin the following 2-minute burst, if not every 2-minute burst for the rest of the fight. And such a mistake can be something as simple as being 1 GCD late on air anchor. That said, the optimal burst of Machinist does involve air anchor, chainsaw and excavator, 2 drills, full metal field, as much battery on the Automaton Queen as possible, wildfire and 2 hypercharges. And yes, that is more than 20 seconds. In fact, it is more than 30 seconds. But that is indeed how much burst Machinist can clump together. A big part of the reason for the importance of 2 hypercharge windows is that the introduction of Blazing Shot and the upgrade of Gauss Round and Ricochet into the checks actually means that the biggest potency per second the Machinist has to offer is concentrated in the hypercharge window, and not the tools. Aside from Full Metal Field, of course, which is ludicrously strong on its own. This does indeed mean that Machinist's filler rotation is insanely strict and requires reacting to cooldowns exactly as they come up, and knowing when is the time to use Automaton Queen so you are as close to full battery again as possible when the burst comes up. You only have excess heat gauge and time for so many hypercharge windows as well, and each of them represents 7.5 seconds where you can't use your tools, which does mean you have space, especially with Drill having 2 charges, but only so much, which can lead optimizing Machinists to feel a lot like having to think several steps ahead. A bit like a chess match, eh? For AoE, the Machinist replaces Drill with Bioblaster and the 1-2-3 with Scattergun, but the sheer firepower of Blazing Shot makes Auto Crossbow have issues overtaking it until 5 targets, which makes the exact target count for true AoE a bit weird for a Machinist. Air Anchor not offering an AoE alternative and Automaton Queen and Wildfire not dealing any AoE damage isn't helping either. Flamethrower having only 80 potency per second still, and still being shorter range than Scattergun and Auto Crossbow, means that it tends to be relegated to this weird spot of being used to sometimes sneak in a free 80 potency when a boss becomes attackable again in a fight or some such. In terms of utility and defense, in addition to Tactician, similar to Bard's Troubadour, Machinist also has Dismantle, which offers just an additional damage reduction option for a single target, which makes it incredibly helpful in boss fights. Both effects can be combined for even more damage reduction, or the Machinist can alternate them to reduce the damage of more mechanics. Overall, Machinist having no true burst window of its own means that when optimizing, it has to awkwardly make one from the pieces to fit into the 2-minute burst other jobs provide. At the same time, the lack of reliance on such a window makes Machinist perform a lot better than some other jobs in less coordinated groups. It also makes Machinist a relatively easy job to pick up and play on the fly, but still leaves it plenty of complexity for those that want to go further beyond. The fact Machinist has 0 randomness also means you can master the rotation of the job for a given fight, as the rotation will play out the exact same way every time. Another advantage Machinist has compared to the other 2 range jobs is, as Machinist offers no raid buffs of its own, it is considered a quote-unquote selfish DPS, which means all of its damage output comes from itself, making it stronger, relatively speaking, the less players are present, in a way. This is particularly clear in soloing deep dungeons, as Machinist both has the ranged roll action utility like an interrupt, free mobility, and incredibly impressive burst damage to boot, which still means, despite the power of other jobs, that Machinist still sits very high on the rankings of soloing deep dungeons, and also just trouncing role-agnostic content in general. This leads us to the final job, Dancer, with a filler rotation and burst cooldowns that both invoke the inspiration of an improvising dancer going with the flow. The dancer chooses one among their party as their dance partner, and focuses their attention on them, especially in terms of raid utility. Somewhat similar to Bard, the dancer's rotation revolves heavily around making the most of their tools every 2 minutes due to the sheer amount of damage buffs available to themselves and others. Weirdly, between Bard and Dancer, while Dancer has what appears to be much more in terms of actual random chances it interacts with directly, with its filler 1-2-3-4 combo being random and giving procs and resources at random, and its dances being a random sequence, for the most part, Dancer's rotation feels much less random, as most of the randomness gives you plenty of time to react to it, compared to Bard, where many procs must be acted upon immediately. Pitch Perfect hits 3 stacks, it's now or never. Hawk's Eye proc, I hope you saw it, or your next action might effectively be a damage loss. Compare this to Dancer, where there's nothing preventing you from doing a full 1-2 combo and then checking whether you got any procs from that. The feathers provided by those attacks also are typically held for later to burst when you want to. Similarly, the random esprit from the dance partner is used in so big batches that, again, no need to panic. The most awkward part of the dance rotation is probably Standard Step, which needs to go out on cooldown, but doesn't scale with speed at all, so any skill speed whatsoever can make Standard Step clip your GCD naturally, and that's just the way it is. Flourish every minute also gives you all the procs, as well as making your next standard finish into finishing move, making it just a regular attack, makes this even more important, and that, combined with Last Dance being something you can smuggle into your burst, makes it somewhat crucial that Standard Step does not drift too much during a fight, as it could weaken your burst. Speaking of the 2-minute burst, dancers have so much going on that there isn't really that much randomness in it at all. Technical Step heralds the burst and Technical Finish initiates it alongside Devilment. At that point, the dancer simply needs to use everything. Starfall Dance, Last Dance, Finishing Move, another Last Dance, Talana somewhere, Dance of the Dawn, as many saber dances as you can afford, and then the reverse cascades and Fountainfall procs. Essentially, Dancer has so much stuff they want to do that the closest their burst gets to true randomness on the GCD is how much Esprit gauge their raid ends up providing them. In terms of personal damage, Dancer is also on the lower side like Bard, and while they provide a rate buff for everyone in technical finish, a much larger part of their damage buffs is in close position, granting their partner both a permanent standard finish damage buff and devilment for the burst window. In terms of utility and defense, Dancer of course also has Shield Samba like the other ranged, and Curing Waltz offers a decently strong AoE heal centered on the Dancer and their partner. Finally, Improvisation allows the Dancer to share a heal over time effect with the raid and provide a shield as a finish. This can both be used quickly as a weave or held when the boss is untargetable anyway. This also means that comparing the 3 range jobs, Bard offers preemptive help in Warden's Paean and aftercare with Nature's Min. Machinist offers extra damage reduction in the moment with Dismantle, and Dancer offers more direct assistance with Curing Waltz and Improvisation actively healing. Due to how Dancers can prepare a standard step up to 15 seconds before they want to actually use it, and this is crucial for setting up the opener to provide an optimal burst window consistently, Dancer is somewhat notorious for relying on an at least 15-second pull timer, if not a bit more. In the context of unusual content like Deep Dungeons, Dancer is in this weird position where close position represents such a big part of the Dancer's performance that a 2-man group is much better for Dancer. Although, you know, as a job with raid buffs, more players is always welcome. So to round up this comparison, each of the range jobs of course brings something unique to the table. In terms of literal performance, the Dancer emphasizes the power of one individual in your raid, where Bard focuses more on the whole package. Machinist wins out if you want to perform the damage yourself, and as a result of having no real burst window of its own, also means that Machinist tends to perform the best among the 3 in less coordinated groups, at least in terms of damage output. Machinist is also your only option if you don't like randomness. As a new player, your only starting option is of course Bard, but as you level up and unlock the other options, if you want the easiest experience with the least things to track, I would recommend Dancer once you can access it. As Dancer and Bard both revolve heavily around the 2-minute burst, starting with Bard should also prepare you well for when you eventually switch to Dancer in that situation. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Shadowbringers, Machinist worked very differently from how it does now, but a little similarly to Dancer. Just one notable example of this is that the 1-2-3 combo each was a 50% chance to enable the next step. And it wasn't a proper combo, just a classic step is ready, meaning that assuming you got the procs, you could realistically do the combo as 1-2-1-3-2-3. This was further coupled with an ammo system that guaranteed this proc and increased potency.